Great. So, hi everyone. I'm Jenna Lacqua, and I'm the Executive Director of the History Project. I am so pleased to welcome you here tonight to our first Out of the Archives for 2023. And I will let Michael and Gerard introduce themselves, but first I have a couple of plugs. For those of you who are not familiar with the History Project, we are Boston's LGBTQ community archives. We are a nonprofit here in Boston, and it's our mission to document, preserve, and share LGBTQ+ history. For those of you who made a donation tonight when you got your ticket, thank you so much. And if you are interested in supporting our work, I will put a link in the chat to where you can donate. Next week, we are gathering for our first book club session of the year. We are reading several banned books this year, and the first is Not All Boys Are Blue, or All Boys Aren't Blue. I will get you the official title of that, but it's next Thursday, so you still have a week to read it. And then 2 weeks from now, the announcement's coming out soon, we'll be having a session with Mev Miller from the Wanderground Lesbian Archives in Providence. So keep an eye out on your email for those. And with that, it is my pleasure to turn it over to you, Michael.
Hi, everyone. I'm Michael Bronski. I know some of you, I think, from a long time ago. I teach at Harvard University. I've written a bunch of books. I've been involved with the gay community in Boston since 1971. And I'm here to present my good friend, Gerard Cabrera, and his new book called HOMO NOVUS, which came out a few months ago. Gerard, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure.
You probably do it better than I can about you.
So good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming tonight. And I see some faces that I haven't seen since the 1980s. Reed Weaver, Chris Guilfoy, people who were at GCN when I was a college student interning. That's a long time ago. Since that time, I've gone to graduate school twice. And now I'm an attorney working in the Manhattan Family Court, doing child neglect and abuse proceedings. And as Michael mentioned, I just wrote a novel called HOMO NOVUS. It came out in October from Rattling Good Yarns Press.
Great. So Jerry, who also goes by Gerard, his real name, and I will be talking about a bunch of things tonight. And he'll be reading excerpts from the novel. We've talked about this, and we're going to actually talk about partially his life, his growing up Catholic, his internship, and his working at Gay Community News for 4 or 5 years in the mid 80s. We're going to talk about the content of the novel, which you'll find out as he's reading it. The place that religion, or how do I want to say this? How Gay Community News, pretty much run by non-religious people, included religion in much of its news and feature coverage, and what that felt like to Jerry, and also the real complications of writing about the Catholic sexual abuse scandal, which is what the book is about. So Joan, can we have 3 quick slides, one of which is just the first slide, which is the title for the event. And next slide, Joan. And the book cover, which I urge everybody to read it. It is fabulous. It's really a really important book, I believe. And the next slide, which may be surprising, I included this. This is a little, I suspect it's a first communion or confirmation statuette that Jerry and I found at Goodwill in Central Square about 3 years ago that I thought of buying, but he grabbed it first. What I love about it is that it has a certain innocence to it, and a certain sort of devotion and creepiness that I think is very intrinsic to Jerry's book. So we can get rid of the slide now, Joan. It's creepy enough. It looks like something out of a horror movie. Oh no, let's just go back to the we'll do the slides and then the next. Let's stop screen sharing and we'll go back to just us talking. Yes, thank you. So Jerry, you grew up in Springfield.
Yes.
Massachusetts, and then you came to Boston. Do you want to talk a little bit about what it was like growing up in Springfield and growing up in a very devout Puerto Rican Catholic family?
Sure, sure. So Springfield, as you all know, is on the western end of the state, and it's actually a real city. I think it might be the third or the fourth largest city in the state. And that's where I grew up, and that's where I set most of the novel. If you don't know, Springfield has a long history of its own. It was founded in 1636 as a trading post. And so it's always maintained a sort of a frontier kind of mentality, I think. But at the time of the novel, Springfield is in its decline. Puerto Ricans in Springfield basically started moving there in the second migration wave that would have followed World War II. The first one, of course, was right after the Spanish-American War, when Puerto Rico was ceded from Spain to the United States as war booty, which it has basically remained, since that time. And about 20 years later is when Puerto Ricans were granted U.S. citizenship. That was 1917. So since that time, there have been various waves of migration. So Springfield, was a mill town, factory town, famous. Its heyday was, has passed by the time the novel begins, but it was the home of the United States' first armory. I think it was chartered by George Washington, or whatever the right word is for that. It's got a lot of history that follows that. It's the home of Dr. Seuss, and the first American dictionary. Merriam-Webster is still in Springfield. And also another important doctor, Dr. Timothy Leary, was born in Springfield. So there's a lot of medical professionals coming out of Western Mass. So at the time the novel is set, there are a lot of working class communities, and they're all broken down by ethnic lines. There's the earlier immigrants who came, the French, Canadians, the Irish, the Italians, the Polish, and they basically were the first laborers who got the jobs in the factories. By the time Puerto Ricans like my parents come to Springfield, there are still some of those jobs left, but there are fewer of them, and they're taking more farm jobs along the Connecticut River Valley, where there's still a lot of big farms, at least at the time. So like most groups that come the last one, as being the last ones in, they have to sort of figure out how to fit in with the other immigrant groups. And what I found growing up was that you could pretty much tell who was who by what church they went to, what parish they belonged to. Were they at the Irish church or the Italian church or the Polish church? And the masses were said, in the Polish church, they would be said in Polish. The French Canadian church, it was in French. And there was no Puerto Rican parish really at the time. So trying to figure out, where you fit was a big part of what the novel tries to do. For Orlando, who's one of the two main characters, it's very important for him to try and figure out where he fits in this place.
So, can you give us a brief overview of the two main characters, and then we have a section that you were going to read about being an altar boy?
Sure. So the novel has two main characters: Father Linus Fitzgerald, who is a priest, and who is older than Orlando Rosario, who's the seminarian who the novel basically tracks their relationship over time, from the time that they meet when Orlando is still an adolescent, and it ends when Orlando is a young man, and it tracks their relationship over time. They're both from Springfield, but from as I was describing before, Linus Fitzgerald his family has already been in Springfield for a while, and Orlando Rosario's is new to Springfield. So they go through the relationship that new arrivals go through with established people. So should I read my little section?
Read the section about the altar boys?
Sure. So I'm going to read a section about Orlando. He's thinking about being an altar boy and what he likes about it. Orlando loved it, dressing in the cassock and surplice, processing through the church as if he were the center of attention. He trains well, the head sacristan told his mother. He genuflected, bowed, and kneeled with all his concentration, and rarely made a mistake. He poured the water for the priests to wash their hands as if it were up to him to make sure their hands were pure. He carried the incense boat and tried to count the gray, amber, and red grains that looked like candy and smelled like holidays when burned with the black charcoal. He dreamed of the day he would be trusted to handle the thurible and swing it full of incense. When that day finally arrived, he almost passed out from all of the smoke. The special vocabulary, the moody whispered prayers and instructions were to Orlando all signs of an exclusive club, and it began to match his own sense of specialness. Was this his true vocation? He didn't like competition. He didn't like sports. Girls were nice, but nothing special. He liked praying and being kind to everyone because helping others was fun. He loved the Mass and the way it started out happy, then got mysterious and sad, but ended happy again. Looking at the faces of the adults around him, he knew there was a secret here that got told and shared in a way everyone could understand. Alone in an oak pew before the Blessed Sacrament, every creak echoed, and the echo was like applauding angels' wings. All the painted wooden statues of saints, the ones who had stood up to emperors and were tortured in the most incredible ways, roasted by Indians or eaten by wild animals, so brave for God and so beautiful. All this history was alive and important, a truer history of the world than his own half history of being from the wrong part of town, or being from a tiny island in the sea that was never on the news, way past Cape Cod and the whaling of Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard. Was being part of this greater history what it was like to be a priest?
That was great. It really sets us up for the rest of the book too. Could you talk a little bit about this sort of the larger social context of class, of the economy, of the ethnic identities and national identities, and how that shapes the characters' sexual identities and sexual behaviors?
Sure. So as I was saying before, there were all these ethnic communities in Orlando's in Springfield, and what I tried to do with the novel was sort of set that as the background for the tension between them. In Springfield, you can say, or you could say at the time, that there were still vying for, the best kinds of jobs and the economic status that they could find, but it was pretty much a working class town. The one thing that everyone had in common was their Catholicism. So I think that Catholic schools at the time were really an equalizer between these competing ethnic groups. And it was a way that religion, particularly Catholicism, was a way to assimilate. If everyone believed the same, then differences could be managed. But even within the churches, within the parishes, you could still see differences. For example, this was post-Vatican II, which was the great reform of the 20th century, which is still contested today. Benedict XVI just died, and he is a big figurehead, whatever he believed himself, who knows, but he was certainly a figurehead for what they called traditionalists, who were critical of Vatican II. At the time I was going through grammar school and high school, it was very much ascendant, progressive ideas. We had, and some people may remember this, we had folk masses, guitars at the mass, nuns who stopped wearing their habits, and a new focus on social justice, and getting students involved in social change. Activist nuns who would go to demonstrate, anti-war demonstrations, and take students along with them. At my school, my grammar school, which doesn't exist anymore, it was knocked down. I remember a school assembly where everyone was gathered, and we were going to hear a talk from the children of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. And they came to the school to talk about the death penalty. And we were all taught, that was like a whole, session on why the death penalty was wrong. Here were these two, well, I guess at that point, they would be in their early 20s or 30s, speaking about their experiences losing their parents, and how no one would ever want their parents to be killed or executed, and that we all had to remember that the death penalty was wrong, and we should always be against it. So those sorts of things are also reflected in the novel, although the novel takes place a little bit later, because these factions never really went away. And there are sections in the novel which I won't be reading from, but you can read, where there are debates between traditionalists and progressives about the role of gay priests, for example, and whether there was a space in the clergy for gay men, even sexually active gay men. All these things were very much in play, and that's how Orlando begins to see the priesthood as this very lively, alive way to interact with the world, in a very naive and idealistic way, but there's some truth to that. The other part of becoming a priest, at least in the novel, and I think probably more generally, is that it's a way to for financial security. Traditionally, and I don't know if that happens so much anymore, but in these very large families, there might be a son or a daughter, or a son and a daughter who are sort of earmarked in a sense for, maybe that one will become a priest or that one will become a nun. It's a way to reduce economic pressures on the family, but it also brings its prestige, perhaps if they do. I always, when I would hear things about, so-and-so had an uncle or an aunt who was a religious, it always sort of struck me as pretty special growing up, not knowing that maybe these were economic decisions some of the time, and not just that someone had a vocation, but maybe there was a little bit more to that. So Orlando sees a career, he sees being a do-gooder, and he sees obviously the spiritual aspect of it, which all attracts him, to wanting to be a priest. Of course, Father Linus is leading him down that road with a pretty strong hand in the story. So whether Orlando has a lot of other opportunities is something I think you have to decide, when you read it. Does that sort of address what you were asking?
It does. So I want to sort of move us out of Springfield. I'm sure you'll be relieved in Springfield again. That was curious to me. You went to Brandeis, and there were many good Catholic colleges in Massachusetts you could have gone to. What brought you to Brandeis? Which thank God you came to Brandeis, and you ended up working at having work study at Gay Community News.
Yes.
Which is sort of incredible to have a college work study program in '84. So could you talk a little bit about why you went to Brandeis, but also what it was like coming to the big city?
Well, I'm afraid that I have to say I wasn't accepted in any other college, but it was recommended to me by a Vista volunteer in Springfield, going back to Springfield for a second, that it was a good school and I should apply. And so that's where I ended up. And this, Brandeis was huge compared to my high school, and Boston was the big city. And coming from Western Massachusetts, everything was cosmopolitan, dangerous, and exciting once you left the city limits. So I'd say that's why, that's how I ended up at Brandeis. Brandeis itself turned out to be an excellent choice in a sense for me, because it had its own radical history and traditions, how it was founded. And then, I had missed already the period where where Herbert Marcuse was teaching there, and Angela Davis was there, and other radical thinkers.
Abby Hoffman.
I'm sorry?
Abby Hoffman.
Oh, of course. Abby Hoffman always came up among students because he was, I guess, the most flamboyant graduate. But it had its own history and culture already of creating these spaces for I guess you'd say unpopular groups. So it was a good place. It did not have a gay group at the time until my junior year. But Michael, you were telling me that you founded a gay group at Brandeis in the 70s.
The first gay group in 71, yes.
And what was it called?
It's called Bagel. Nobody was they were very smart. They weren't very imaginative. I was the token Catholic there.
Well, I think it still is probably majority Jewish students there, but a sizable, non-Jewish, student body, and it really was a matter of indifference to most students, I think, at the time. But there was a lot of things going on then. There were the porn debates. There was the divestment from South Africa on various college campuses. And of course, at the time, there was AIDS. And the gay group that I was part of actually led a protest against Eddie Murphy in 1985. And GCN actually helped with that, helped thinking through that. If people remember, he started off as doing part of his stand-up was AIDS jokes and gay jokes. So I think he just got an award the other day. I don't know if people were aware of that, but so
you get to GCN.
I'm sorry?
What was the connection between Brandeis and going to GCN?
Well, so Brandeis had a very good work study program, and you could pick placements, and Gay Community News was in the binder. And I just picked it and got my $4.05 an hour.
Right.
And so I started taking the train in to Porter Square, and then getting on the Red Line and going to going to Downtown Crossing and walking up those rickety steps. And I still remember the smell. It's a good smell. Wood, paper, dust, ink, and lots and lots of laughter. That's probably one of the biggest things I remember. I started out stuffing envelopes on Thursday nights, I think it was, into the plain brown envelopes at the time. And if Michael, the return address on that was not, it didn't say Gay Community News, right?
No, I'm sure, I don't remember exactly, but I'm sure it didn't.
Right.
It may have been a post office box, which is 22 Bromfield Street.
Right.
And this was 1984, right?
Yeah. Yes, 1984. Yes. I did that for a year.
Next two slides. So I included these. This is one of the earliest issues from '73, and one of the last coming closer when we went to be a quarterly, sort of 1993. If people aren't familiar with the covers, it's interesting that the design didn't change a whole lot. It just got a little bit more sophisticated. And the next slide, Joan. And these are two covers from '84, which was when Jerry would have been putting them in envelopes. So, Jerry, what was it like coming from Springfield, going to a sort of very liberal school, and then suddenly being thrust into the maelstrom of gay politics and socializing in bars and, dare I say, sexual opportunities in Boston?
Well, it was pretty exciting. I have to say. I mean, there was all sorts of things going on. With respect to GCN, it was really where I got my political education. I pretty much learned whatever I needed to know at GCN just by hanging out and being around so many smart people and thoughtful people and creative people, and the debates that would happen, around issues, and it was just a world-changing experience, really. Probably more so than college itself. I guess I would say it was like what I was learning in the classroom was, you could see it being acted out in real life at Gay Community News.
Right. And you were 20 then, 19, 19?
I guess about 20.
About 20.
Yeah.
But not old enough to go to the bars yet.
As soon as I was able to, yes. And
Okay.
Maybe I should read that section.
Sure. That'd be
Okay.
great.
I am going to read a little bit about what it was like for Orlando to go out with his friend named Eric to the bars and experience Boston's nightlife. This section is called Gay Nights. They'd ride the T or take Eric's car, and an hour later, they were in a new world of male friendships, the kind he'd never imagined. Boston's nightlife was a smorgasbord of smoky bars, dance clubs, and bathhouses. If you were a preppy or blonde, Buddy's was the place. If you were into new wave or punk, the 1270. Leather, the Ramrod. Cowboys your thing? Chaps. Blacks, Puerto Ricans, transsexuals, Haymarket for you. Sporters for the down and dirty. The Napoleon Club for piss elegant. Eric and Orlando explored them all. Eric breezed past the bouncers with a wave, But sometimes Orlando would get rejected with the usual, "We don't like your kind" looks he was used to in Boston. And if Eric couldn't convince or rebuke the bouncer, they'd move on to the next bar or end up as far as the Store 24 in Central Square, watching the street life and other club goers who were luckier. "We're not that far from the Paradise, and they hardly ever card, so let's try there." "Attaboy," Eric said when Orlando made the suggestion. "Don't let the bastards get you down." College night at campus or go-go boys at Metro, it didn't matter to either of them. Eric would buy a couple of drinks and they would watch the dance floor for a while, Orlando smoking. Every once in a while, they'd shout a comment to each other over the booming sound system. "Heaven, pinch me." They tried cocktails with gay names. Eric bought Orlando a Blue Boy, and Orlando bought Eric a Pink Narcissus. If funding was low, $1 Rolling Rocks. Orlando was all eyes. The bartenders flirted. The DJ, spinning his records in his booth, flirted with guys who dared to make requests. The coat check girl flirted with all the lesbians. Everyone flirted. Eric sweet-talked, while Orlando nodded and smiled, racking his brain for something witty to say. A jock in an Izod polo shirt gave Eric the once-over, and Orlando felt jealous. Orlando made eye contact with a cute delinquent in a muscle shirt, but would hardly know what to do next, his stomach tied in a knot and his feet cemented to the floor. The drag performances made them laugh so hard that they snorted their drinks through their noses. If in Canada he had been a tourist, here Orlando was becoming a citizen. But there was a new place to try. Eric and Orlando went together to the Skybox. It was Orlando's first time at a bathhouse. "We'll use the buddy system," Eric explained. "We check in with each other, see, every 30 minutes or so." "What if you're busy?" "I'll signal you like this." Eric gave him a thumbs up. They paid the cashier without having to show ID and followed the attendant to the locker room where Orlando couldn't figure out how to undo the lock until Eric did it for him. "Remember the buddy system, all right?" "Okay," Orlando agreed. Eric vanished, and Orlando missed him immediately. Why couldn't they fool around again, just the two of them? He took his time to fold his clothes and sniffed the towel to make sure it was clean. It smelled like bleach and was too small to cover more than your privates. It was a uniform, and either it fit or it looked like you'd outgrown it. The corridors were full of wandering men dressed in the same coarse white cloths, and Orlando joined them. Tall, short, Black, Asian, Latin, ogres, fairies, beauty queens, muscle boys, guys in glasses, guys in jockstraps, guys wearing boots. Orlando plunged into the variety and the anonymity, everyone looking for different things. He saw flushed bodies and faces and passed open cubicle doors, not knowing if it was rude to look. It became clear, though, that an open door was an invitation. You took your chances. Either it was a jackpot or a booby trap. Booth 1, someone taking drugs, sloppy and no fun. He was invited into another booth, and this time, bingo, a good-looking stranger. They touched, they kissed, they fondled. No one stopped them. The door stayed open. People watched, exposed and protected at the same time. What was it in the touch of the stranger? Like he owned you, but it was with your permission. Like he was going to get what he wanted from you, but you were giving it to him gladly. Hands were sacred. They were sex organs. The air was thick and humid with sweat and the arousing sweetness of chlorine. Sure, it wasn't the most hygienic, but who cared? No matter the germs, no matter that the pink light making every shade of skin glow prettily also reminded him of the light bulbs that signaled when a penitent occupied a confessional booth. There was no room for repentance in this place. Here was the transparent joy of unashamed men, orgies of visible and invisible desires.
Great. I actually love that passage, and could you talk briefly, because I want to talk more about GCN's interplay with religion. What do you think about this sort of community found in the church and, in a seminary, in a novitiate, in a congregation, and the community found in a bathhouse or a bar or a gay community news layout room on
Yes,
Friday.
yes. I was trying to, in the passage that I just read, I hope it comes out, in throughout the novel, but they're meant to be sort of reflections of each other. And I think that's the wondering feeling that Orlando is having when he's sort of through his senses kind of realizing the same feeling he gets with the, in the oak pew before the Blessed Sacrament, and the sounds and the sense of the church are almost sort of echoing in the communion that's happening in the bathhouse. So I think that his spiritual eyes are opening a little bit, maybe probably to the non-orthodox way of looking at things, but certainly not the first time that has happened. And likewise with Gay Community News or the gay group, a sort of community that doesn't exist in the family, that you have to find for yourself outside of the family and create, for yourself. So I think that's kind of what the passage is trying to sort of show.
Right. The passage always reminds me, there's a line from Streetcar Named Desire by Tennessee Williams, where Blanche, with a heavy sexual overtone, says, "My God, sometimes there's God so quickly."
Right.
Joan, can we do the next two slides? So when Jerry and I were talking this weekend, last week, we were both surprised at how much religion, the next slide, yes, was actually in GCN from the beginning, because I was involved in GCN from 75 until the end. And I don't believe many people on staff were churchgoers, except for people who were brought up Jewish, who did observance on the holy days, more dinners than anything else. But you can see this is from 70, this is the 6th issue, right? There's actually a phone number for Dignity, the Catholic group in Boston. There's a phone number for Father Shanley, who did later involved with scandals, who did youth outreach, a phone number for the Metropolitan Community Church. I had looked at my old address book. The numbers for Fag Rag and for gay community and for Good Gay Poets were both Charlie Shively's phone numbers on Hemingway Street. Here's a contact for Elaine Noble when she was doing Gateway Radio. Next slide. Joan, thank you. And here's an article about dignity written by Warren Blumenfeld, who many of us know, from 1984. And Jerry was saying that almost every issue had something about religion in it, which I think really speaks to the incredible deep sense of community and democracy that democratization that gay community had, that even though the editors were not interested in this, they completely understood how important religious observance or religious groups or religious community was to many of our readers at the time. Jerry, could you read the passage now about the Dignity meeting?
Sure.
I'm just sort of watching the time because I think we'll have a lot of questions too.
Okay, sure.
And I have more creepy slides too. This is Orlando going to a Dignity meeting, right?
Yes. The Dignity Mass was in a basement too. Orlando realized as he left the washing machine spinning and rocking through another cycle to start climbing back up to the first floor. Eric had driven there and it had taken a whole half hour to find a parking spot. By the time they'd rushed down the steps to the lower chapel, nearly cracking their heads open on the low beams in the stairwell, the entrance hymn had ended. They sat down in the last row. Light bulbs screwed into plain sockets gave off a weak, powdery light. The gray metal folding chairs, whose legs scraped the cement floor and drowned out the priest's opening words, were arranged in rows facing what was the saddest looking altar Orlando could ever remember seeing. The white frontal looked like a polyester bedsheet, and the candlesticks didn't match. One limp bouquet of daisies stood in a vase planted on top of an old crate. Next to that was what was supposed to be the lectern, an adjustable music stand. So much for the gays and the lesbians and the bisexuals, Orlando thought. The congregation, however depressing the cellar was, made up for it. There were cheerful men, women, a few kids, a nun in a habit, old and young together. It could have been a congregation from anywhere. Orlando recognized the celebrant, the street priest who was always on TV protesting against the wars in Central America or demonstrating for some other cause. He wore sneakers underneath his vestments, and his stole was tie-dyed. Orlando thought it was a bit too much. See him? Eric whispered. Yeah, I see him, Orlando answered. Eric craned his neck. That's Deus Ex. Who? Jim Macchianata. He gives wild sermons and wild parties too. At least that's what I hear anyway. Not bad looking, eh? Shh, Orlando elbowed him. Pay attention to the readings. What do you think I'm trying to do? Eric said. He was practically staring at Father Jim. After the gospel was read, Father Jim gave a homily that compared Jesus as a wanderer to the runaways and derelicts wandering around Boston. See the face of Christ, he suggested, in the least of us, in each other's faces. At the sign of peace, Eric hugged Father Jim and whispered something to him. Father Jim laughed and smiled as if Eric had just told him the best joke he'd ever heard. At communion time, Orlando could have sworn he saw Father Jim give Eric a quick wink. What was that all about? Orlando asked him after Mass was over. You've been here before, haven't you? Maybe, Eric answered.
Right. I think that's wonderful. That really captures the sort of sense of gay community and church community together. But I think that what I love about the novel, I love many things, but one thing I really love is that you really get to this sort of, despite the church's incredibly homophobic stands over the centuries and its interference with secular law and with influencing society, this sort of sheer homoeroticism of Catholicism for many gay men. And I'm thinking of, there, beside people who just are Catholic and believe it, the church itself has had a fascination. I mean, it's no accident that people like Oscar Wilde or Ronald Fairbanks converted on their deathbeds. There's a whole history of gay men enthralled with the church. And I think it's because the church actually has an intensely homoerotic content to it, to its liturgy, to its festivals, to its imagery. Joan, could we go through the next couple of slides, and keeping in mind that we could actually, we have a few more minutes before we can actually do questions. So these are just some random slides that I put together today of the famously of Saint Sebastian's, a picture from 1625, ubiquitous in church liturgy. He was a Roman soldier who was killed for his faith. Next slide. Here's a more butch Saint Sebastian from 1499. Here's Saint Sergius and Saint Bacchus, which are actually the both Roman and Eastern Orthodox Church, who were Roman soldiers who were beloved to one another. Take that for what it means. Here they are with halos or with nimbuses with Jesus behind them. And here are two modern versions of the saints that many of they've actually been reincarnated as more contemporary looking gay men. Next slide, Joan. Here's a stained glass window going back to the Hebrew Bible, right? This is Jonathan and David. The book of Samuel tells us that Jonathan loved that his love for David surpassed the love of women. So the next two slides are contemporary slides that Jerry and I found the other day. I didn't put titles on these because I thought it should be labeled "He Who Must Not Be Named." This is Cardinal the infamous Cardinal Law, who covered up so much sexual abuse scandals in Boston. And the other picture is Cardinal Raymond Burke, who literally looks like Voldemort in this picture. But we sort of wanted, if you haven't, I don't know how much Jerry wants to tell about the plot, but you've probably ascertained that Linus and Orlando enter into a relationship. And what I think is remarkable about the book, John, we can take the picture down. It's just too creepy to look at. He looks like Tallulah Bankhead drunk and dressed up. Is that it really addresses the choosing my words carefully, this sort of sexual abuse crisis within the church, but it also addresses it in a completely wonderful way that we understand the people, we understand their relationships, we understand what's wrong with it, what's good about it, what's almost salvation-like about it. At the same time, is incredibly complicated. Jerry, could you talk a little bit about how you, because I think it's the only book I know of that actually attempts to give us a full portrait of the complexity of this?
Yeah, well, we read, we all read the headlines in the news and saw things on television, and we could see that the way the story was generally told left a lot of questions, I think, in probably a lot of people's minds about how this could happen. And a question I wanted to ask and try to answer in this novel is what happened between the two of them in their relationship, not so much from the point of view of just one of them, because there's writing about both about this from one point of view or from the other point of view, but not really from both points of view. And the way the novel is structured is they oscillate, the points of view changes from one to the other. It keeps on going back and forth, and that's how you find out about that's how you learn the story. I went to a high school seminary myself, and so I was sort of in that world up to a point, and it just seemed like those kinds of places really are laboratories for relationships between men and boys, between boys and boys, or all of the different kinds of permutations of that. And that's kind of what I wanted to sort of get into without making it too one-dimensional. I think that I was able to do that.
Right. I think what's so wonderful is that you don't condemn and you don't excuse.
Right.
You
To go
actually
back,
try to explain.
and to go back to your other point a little bit earlier about the homoeroticism and the attraction, one of the things that I tried to focus on is the body, in Catholicism, Jesus's body is everything, right? And so I think that is one of the things that kind of comes up again and again, the broken body on the cross, the resurrected body that's perfect, but you have to go through all this stuff to get there. So I think that's there's something very attractive, at least to these characters, who feel already that they're different and who kind of correctly believe that they're not going to have an easy life if they don't do something to sort of build a safety net around themselves. And it's a good option, at least from their point of view, because as I said before, people look up to you, and you get a lot of respect.
Right. And I do think that the main difference between Catholicism and Protestantism is actually the focus upon the body, literally the body incarnate, from the Latin. I had 4 years of Latin in high school. Carnal, right? Literally the body incarnate, literally the human body. The difference between the crucifix with Christ on it and the cross.
Yes, and that's something I play with in the book as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have 9 minutes left. Do people, and Joan's face has disappeared, but it says do people have questions? I hope.
I'm happy to, if folks are doing the hand raise thing, make sure that you're unmuted, or I can ask questions that are typed into the chat as well.
Yeah, I'll ask one. Am I open?
All right.
Yeah, audio working.
Go ahead, Brooks.
Yeah, I'd love to hear Michael and Gerard both speak to the sort of dual nature of the church, of the Catholic Church as an institution that is, by many accounts, led by gay priests, but is also an institution that has been responsible for oppressing queer people. I'll leave it at that.
Jerry?
Well, it's sort of a paradoxical sort of relationship, I don't know that there's a grand theory of why that is. I mean, I suppose you could say it's self-hatred, or if you want to explain it that way, but I think that the core of it is about its single-minded focus about control of the body. And I think that, since, like we were just talking about, that the body is central in Catholicism, that there's something going on there with wanting to be in charge. Michael, what do you think?
I think that's true. I think the other part of it is that, and I just remember there was a slide I was going to put in there and I forgot to today, as I was fielding emails from students. If people are familiar, if you're not familiar, look it up on Google Images. There's a statue by Bernini that's somewhere in the Vatican called The Ecstasy of Saint Teresa.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful marble statue. Her head is thrown back. She's either having an orgasm or she's experiencing God, or both.
Or dying, right?
Right. And I think it's supposed to be both, right? I mean, Bernini was was an Italian sculptor who was as obsessed with sex as he was religion. So I think within Catholicism there is this sort of notion of salvation and of ecstasy, which is easily transferable to sexual ecstasy as well as religious ecstasy. Something that the Reformation was actually not only trying to eradicate, but was one of their main complaints about the Church of Rome was that it was the Whore of Babylon. And you don't call people the Whore of Babylon coincidentally. I mean, they literally meant it. Because of the sexualization. And I think that it gets filtered through, the most awful sorts of homophobias of, burning heretics in the Middle Ages, to campaigns led by the church against all kinds of queer people and queer institutions. But I agree with Jerry that it's completely bound up. I mean, it's not two sides of the same coin. It's like an ever-changing two sides that keep on flipping. And I think that's what the book really, really gets to beautifully, and really gets to the heart of. I mean, it's very easy reading the headlines to say, "Oh my God, these priests were horrible. They abused all these boys or these young men," and of course that's true. But everybody involved in this was a person with their own history.
Right. One of the things that I bring up in the novel is, I guess you could say it's my own theory, possibly about these particular characters, but maybe extrapolated more generally, is that the theology of the priesthood, and Michael and I have talked about this, when a priest is ordained, they're supposed to be changed ontologically, and that's what the sacrament confers, and that you're not the same person anymore. And I think that sort of thinking, like I'm not like ordinary people, kind of lends itself to abuse of power. I think that sort of seems logical to me, that you can sort of end up in a place like that.
Also, the other part of that is that you're a different person, like everybody is once they come out.
Yes.
Once they come out, they're actually a different person than they were before they came out, no matter how you define coming out. Whether it's
Yes,
internal
yes.
understanding, or telling your parents, or telling friends, or joining a gay group at school, or going to a GCN layout night. Are there any more questions?
I think someone has their hand up.
Yep,
Okay.
Bill. Oh, we can't hear you. Okay, try. Sorry, it's coming through sort of robotic sounding. Would you be able to try to use the chat? And if not, we'll give Bill and John a second to try that. Are there any other questions from the audience? We're getting close to 8. It's okay if we go over by a couple minutes, as long as no one has a hot date that they need to run off to.
They can wait.
And I will say, I've been frantically searching my own files. I was in San Juan in Puerto Rico for a wedding earlier last year at this point. And in the church that's purported to be the oldest church in the Americas, there's the most sexy homoerotic Saint Sebastian that I've seen in a while. And you know, other gay friends of ours at the same wedding, which was a gay wedding, were like, you have to pop into that church and see this Saint Sebastian. And I know I took a picture and I cannot find it. But it was just one of those moments where I was like, ooh, this is, somebody knows what's going on here. And it looks like there's also a link to that, the Ecstasy of Saint Teresa, in the chat now, if folks want to look at that themselves.
Which is quite remarkable.
All right. And Bill and John, are you working on writing something? Okay. They're still writing. Yeah, I think before as we wait for John and Bill's question in the chat, I'm just putting in the chat again the link to support the History Project, to learn more about our upcoming events, and to get your copy of Homo Novus. And then, okay, we have another hand up, although it says owner, so I'm not sure how to call on you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know what happened to my Zoom label of my name, but I'm Kevin. At any rate, I wanted to ask Gerard, as a lapsed Catholic, and myself, that is, and having had some rather difficult encounters with priests that were somewhat sadistic, although not sexual in nature, I have still a lot of anger at the Catholic Church. I have a lot of anger at the hypocrisy. I have a lot of anger at the homophobia, and the very fact that it's sort of like J. Edgar Hoover, you know, the anger I have at the FBI run by that man. These men in the closet that sort of convert whatever that shame is into some, you know, exercise of violence over other people. I don't know if you sounded very somewhat sympathetic, not only to the relationship, but sort of the context for that. And I'm wondering if your book does represent that anger that I think many of us ex-Catholics feel, who are gay, feel about the church.
Well, within the story, these characters don't really have a lot of insight. And so what's portrayed in the story is really they're just beginning to sort of think about what they've done and how they've gotten where they are. And Orlando, without, saying too much about, what happens, has a moment of what you're describing, I think. And it is very scary to him to sort of make a connection between his life and what happened to him. And he has let's say, murderous thoughts. So I think I address it, that way. With Father Linus, again, without getting too much into it, he's sort of a lost soul, and for reasons that you can read about, I guess. But there are good novels about this subject where that anger is more pronounced, definitely. But a lot of it is just sort of about coming to the realization, because as you know, like over and over and over again, you hear these stories about how these kids were told what they were doing wasn't bad, or they were told that they were bad and they had to keep their mouth shut. So I think that it takes a really long time to see that. And in this story, since it happens so much, it happens very early in the life of Orlando, he hasn't really had a chance to sort of come to terms and start understanding really what's happened, all in all of its aspects. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and so there are two other questions in the chat that have come through from John and Bill. Bill mentions, I want to commend Gerard for a good picture of a young gay Catholic. I am Boston Irish Catholic with an uncle, a priest, who was trying to get me to join up. I still drop into St. Cecilia's. Do you still go to Mass?
I do not.
Neither do I. The other question was, could you please explain the title and photo? And I believe they're talking about the cover of the book, but
sure.
Yeah.
And
So,
Joan, maybe you want to put that up on the screen. That's the last slide, I think.
Sure. Let's see if I can get PowerPoint to
Also,
cooperate.
It'll be a nudge to buy the book.
So this is a photograph by a photographer named Mario Giacomelli, an Italian photographer who died, quite some time ago, but 20th century. And he did a book actually on seminarians at a seminary in Italy. So this is just one of the images that appear in this book. I was able to just write to either his daughter or his granddaughter directly, and she gave me permission to use it. And I didn't even have to pay, which was pretty amazing. The title actually the title has a history. The original Homo Novus is in the Roman Republic, is the non-patrician who is elevated to the Senate, and then as part of his getting a higher status, he becomes a new man in the eyes of the law and I guess of the community at the time. That term then later on, much later on, gets used by St. Paul to talk about how Christians now become new men, using the same idea that you were, pagan or whatever you were, and now you're being elevated to this higher level of being a Christian, and that makes you a new man. And then finally, as I mentioned before, when a priest is ordained, or when a man is ordained a priest, that's also this sort of elevation. So, or a rebirth and things of that nature. And both of these characters are really, that's what they're searching for, rebirth and also salvation, which is kind of the goal in Catholicism. So that's sort of the story behind the title and the photograph on the cover.
Excellent. And I got one comment from Brooks, and Brooks, I'm going to let you have the last comment.
Yeah, okay. Thank you guys for doing this tonight. It's of special interest to me, and I just wanted to let everybody know who's here tonight. I'm working on a biography of Phil Saviano, who was a gay man with AIDS who died a little over a year ago, and is probably the best known whistleblower in the clergy sex abuse crisis nationally. A Boston man. So I'd love to, if any of you knew him or have thoughts about his legacy, I'd love to hear from you. And I know Joan, I've bugged Joan plenty already for this project. And she'll know how to find me, or I can put my email or number up. So.
Oh yeah, if anyone emails the History Project at info@historyproject.org, I can get that message to Brooks or even to Gerard or Michael. And I think I will close us out for the evening. And I just want to say thank you so much, Gerard and Michael, for everything, for a very interesting conversation. I'm looking forward to reading the book. There, like I said, there has been a link in the chat if you haven't picked up your copy to bookstore.org to pick up yours. And on behalf of the History Project, thank you all for being here tonight with us. Hopefully we'll see you next week for the book club. You have a week to read the book. And if not, we'll see you in 2 weeks for the Lesbian Archives Wanderground in Providence. And I hope you all have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Joan.
Thank you, Joan. Thank you, Boston History Project.
Tony,
and thank you, Tony.